Good Times, 1974 to 1979. After 50 years. What happened to the cast? Now 2025. In 1974, Good Times brought America into the Evans family's living room, where love battled poverty and laughter kept the lights on. But here's the part most fans never heard behind those iconic smiles, were real lives marked by sudden deaths, painful betrayals, illness, and careers that rose, then crashed hard. Some fought Hollywood stereotypes face to face, some vanished too soon. And a few are still here in 2025 carrying memories that don't fit the sitcom ending. Stay with me, because what happened after the cameras stopped is more shocking than any episode. And if you respect Black TV history, hit like, subscribe, and comment your first Good Times memory right now. Jeanette Dubois. Jeanette Dubois was far more than Willona Woods, the sassy, big-hearted neighbor who could cut through tension with one perfectly timed look. Born on August 5th, most credible biographies list 1932, though a few later sources reported 1938. She grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and carried that city toughness into every role she touched. Before Good Times arrived in 1974, Dubois had already built a solid foundation in theater, music, and television, including appearances in variety and comedy programs that sharpened her timing and stage presence. When she stepped into Willona at about age 41 to 42, she created a character who felt completely real, funny, blunt, stylish, and quietly protective of the Evans family. Willona wasn't comic relief. She was a woman navigating the same world as Florida, only doing it with a different kind of armor. Dubois's talent wasn't confined to acting. She was a singer and songwriter, and her musical fingerprints are all over classic Black TV history. Alongside Jeff Barry, she co-wrote and performed "Movin' On Up" the theme for the Jeffersons, a song that became a national mood of aspiration. She also kept working steadily through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, turning up in films like "I'm Gonna Get You Sucka," and lending her voice to animated projects such as The PJs. Even when Hollywood drifted toward younger faces, she found lanes where her voice, rhythm, and personality stayed in demand. What moment of Willona made you laugh the hardest? Behind the public sparkle, Dubois carried heavy private responsibilities. She was a mother of 4, and by many accounts spent long stretches raising her children largely on her own while balancing auditions, rehearsals, and recording sessions. In interviews over the years, her resilience came through less as a slogan and more as a habit: show up, deliver, keep going. Friends and colleagues often described her as generous but no nonsense, the same mix fans saw on screen. Dubois passed away on February 17, 2020 in Glendale, California, after being found unresponsive at home. The official cause was cardiac arrest. She was 87 if born in 1932, or early 80s if using the alternate year. Either way, she worked almost to the end of her life. What she left behind can't be measured only by credits or money. She gave television one of its most vivid women sharp edges, soft-core full humanity, and helped soundtrack a whole era of Black success stories. Esther Rolle. Esther Rolle carried herself like someone who had already lived 3 lifetimes before America ever learned her name. Born November 8, 1920 in Pompano Beach, Florida, to Bahamian immigrant parents, she was the 10th of 18 children, a background that taught disciplined faith and a fierce sense of responsibility early on. Long before sitcom fame, Rolle trained in dance and theater, worked in New York's garment district to pay bills, and fought her way into serious, dramatic spaces that rarely welcomed Black women in the 1950s and 60s. That grind shaped the gravity she later brought to every role. Audiences first met her as Florida Evans on Maude 1972 to 1974, where she played the sharp, no-nonsense housekeeper with quiet authority. When Florida was spun off into Good Times in 1974, Rolle became the emotional spine of the series. At 53 years old when the show began, she didn't just portray a mother under economic pressure. She embodied the kind of strength many viewers recognized from their own homes, protective, exhausted, loving, and unwilling to surrender her pride. Florida Evans was not written as a superhero. Role made her human, and that humanity is why the character still lands today. Roll's real influence came from what she refused to accept. As the show's popularity grew, she openly challenged storylines that pushed J.J. Evans into exaggerated clowning. She believed it threatened the show's mission and the dignity of the family it represented. Her stand cost her comfort and stability. She left the series after season 4, and producers wrote Florida out by marrying her to Carl Dixon and moving her away. Yet even in protest, she never abandoned the audience. She returned for the final season only after assurances that Florida would be portrayed with respect again. That kind of creative courage was rare then, and it remains rare now. Away from the series, Rolla built a formidable career in film and television drama. She won a Primetime Emmy in 1979 for Summer of My German Soldier, a historic milestone that made her the first black woman to receive that specific supporting actress Emmy. Her later work included I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, Driving Miss Daisy, and Rosewood, each performance marked by steel and tenderness in the same breath. Roll was married to Oscar Robinson from 1955 until their divorce in 1975 and had no biological children, though friends often said her nurturing spirit was real, not performed. Diabetes plagued her final years. Her health deteriorated through the 1990s, and she died on November 17, 1998 in California, 9 days after turning 78. What she left behind wasn't just Florida Evans. It was a standard that representation should never be bought at the price of self-respect. John Amos. John Amos had a presence that felt like bedrock, steady, direct, and impossible to ignore. He was born on December 27, 1939 in Newark, New Jersey, and before acting ever became his lane, he chased athletics with real seriousness, playing football at Colorado State University. That early training showed up later in his work. He moved like a man who understood discipline, endurance, and the cost of showing up every day. In the early 1970s, he started getting television roles, including a memorable run on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, where his natural gravity made even short appearances feel full. When Good Times premiered in 1974, Amos was 34, and his casting as James Evans Sr. instantly redefined what a working-class black father could look like on primetime TV. James wasn't polished or perfect. He was tired, frustrated, loving, proud, and determined not to let poverty steal his family's dignity. Viewers believed him because Amos didn't play strength. He lived it in every gesture. The character balanced humor with hard truth, and for many households, James Evans felt like the father they had, the father they missed, or the father they wished they'd known. Which James Evans scene still sits in your heart today. Yet Amos's real-life courage showed just as sharply off camera. As the show gained popularity, he became vocal about storylines. He felt drifted into damaging caricature, especially the way the series increasingly leaned on JJ's exaggerated clowning. Amos argued that comedy should never come at the price of self-respect. That stance put him in direct conflict with producers, and in 1976 he was removed from the series after season 3. His character was written out by dying off-screen, a choice that left a hole the show never truly healed. For many viewers, the emotional core changed the moment James was gone. Instead of fading away, Amos rebuilt his path through work that proved his range was far wider than one sitcom. In 1977, he portrayed the adult Kunta Kinte in Roots, earning major acclaim and an Emmy nomination. He continued working for decades in roles that crossed genres: the proud fast food patriarch Cleo McDowell in Coming to America, Admiral Fitz Wallace on The West Wing, and parts in films like Die Hard 2 and many more television dramas. His career became a quiet lesson in resilience. Get knocked down, stand back up, keep your standards. His private life carried its own storms. Amos had 2 marriages that ended, and in later years, family conflict became public, including legal accusations in 2023 involving elder care. The details were painful and contested, but they revealed a hard truth. Even icons struggle behind the curtain. John Amos died on August 21, 2024, at 84 in Los Angeles County from congestive heart failure. In 2025, his legacy remains unmistakable. He wasn't just a TV dad, he was a man who fought for honest representation and whose work still teaches what integrity looks like when the lights are on and when they're off. Johnny Brown. Johnny Brown's career was a masterclass in versatility, even if television history often remembers him for one unforgettable role. Born June 11, 1937 in St. Petersburg, Florida, he grew up with entertainment in his bloodstream and a performer's restlessness in his feet. Before he ever set foot in the Evans family's building, Brown was already a singer-dancer and nightclub entertainer working rooms where you earned applause the hard way. One joke, one note, one beat at a time. That early hustle shaped his rhythm, quick, musical, and deeply human. National audiences first noticed him as a regular on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, where his timing and physical comedy stood tall in a fast-moving ensemble. He wasn't just funny. He had a polished stagecraft that came from serious training and long nights performing live. Broadway also called him. Brown appeared in major productions, including the original stage run of The Wiz, adding another layer to a resume that already crossed music, sketch comedy, and theater. By the time Good Times brought him in during its second season, he had decades of skill tucked behind that easy smile. As Nathan Bookman, the building superintendent, Brown created a character that could walk a tightrope between annoyance and affection. Bookman was comic chaos in uniform, blustering, wheezing forever, bumping into the Evans family's orbit, yet he never felt mean-spirited. Brown made him a neighborhood fixture, the kind of guy you roll your eyes at but still check on when he's not around. Over the show's final seasons, Bookman became essential, a steady shot of humor that contrasted the family's daily grind. After Good Times ended in 1979, Brown stayed active across television. He popped up on a wide range of series: The Jeffersons, Martin, Family Matters, Sister, Sister, Punky Brewster, Touched by an Angel, and more often stealing scenes in small doses. He also kept his musical side alive, recording songs earlier in life and continuing to perform whenever the opportunity fit. In later years, his life centered on family and craft rather than headline-chasing fame. He was married to June Russell Brown, and they remained together for decades, a quiet stability behind a public career. Brown's final chapter was sudden and heartbreaking. He had been living with cardiac issues and a pacemaker, and on March 2, 2022, after a routine doctor's visit in Los Angeles, he collapsed and died at 84. The news was shared by his daughter, actress and composer Sharon Brown, who described the loss as a shock that felt unreal. In 2025, what remains strongest isn't just the laugh he brought to millions, it's the truth that he was a full-spectrum entertainer, a man who could sing, dance, and punch up a scene with one look, leaving a legacy far bigger than any single hallway in Cabrini Green. Ben Powers. Ben Powers arrived on Good Times late in its run, yet he left an impression that still feels fresh 50 years later. Born Alton Adelbert Powers on July 5, 1950 in Brooklyn, New York, he was raised in Providence, Rhode Island, where his artistic life began on stage rather than on camera. He studied design at the Rhode Island School of Design, but performance kept pulling him back, first through local theater, then through the highly respected Trinity Repertory Company, where he trained in a tough, actor-first environment that demanded emotional truth over flash. Before his best-known television work, Powers built a real reputation as a multi-talent entertainer. He did stage drama, comedy, singing, and live club performances, the kind of places where you learn to win a crowd without special effects. That skill opened doors to national TV. In 1977-1978, he joined the cast of NBC's Laugh-In, proving he could handle quick sketches and broad humor while still keeping his own identity. When he stepped into Good Times in 1978, Powers was 28, and his character, Keith Anderson, was introduced as Thelma Evans' steady, ambitious boyfriend, a former football player trying to build a future. Keith wasn't designed to be a punchline. He was a young black man with goals, patience, and a moral center which quietly shifted the tone of the final season. His relationship with Thelma brought a new kind of hope to the Evans apartment love that didn't erase struggle, but made it feel survivable. Did you want Thelma and Keith to last, or did you feel the show moved too fast? After the series ended in 1979, Powers kept working throughout the 1980s. He appeared in films such as Cheech and Chong's Next Movie, 1980, Things Are Tough All Over, 1982, and The Man Who Loved Women, 1983. On television, he guest starred across popular shows of the decade, including Laverne and Shirley, The Greatest American Hero, Gimme a Break, and The New Odd Couple. His longest post-sitcom run came on Mickey Spillane's Mike Hammer, The New Mike Hammer, 1984 to 1985, where he played Moochie in 13 episodes, showing a tougher street-smart edge, very different from Keith's calm steadiness. Hollywood, however, can be a shrinking room for actors whose fame peaks early. By the mid-1980s, Powers stepped away from the industry, returning to a quieter life out of the spotlight. He was married to Julia Harper until her death in 2012 and was a father of 4 children, grounding himself in family after years of chasing roles. Ben Powers died on April 6, 2015 in New Bedford, Massachusetts from liver cancer at 64. In hindsight, his story feels like a reminder that not every meaningful performer gets a long victory lap, yet the work they leave behind can still carry real weight, especially for viewers who recognize themselves in Keith's decency and quiet resolve. Louis Gossett Jr. Louis Gossett Jr. was the kind of performer who could step into a scene and make it feel taller. Born May 27, 1936 in Coney Island, Brooklyn. He grew up with a nurse mother and a working man father, learning early that talent had to travel with grit. A childhood case of polio left him weak for a time, but it sharpened his resolve. At 17, after a sports injury nudged him toward drama class, a teacher pushed him to audition for Broadway, and he won a role in Take a Giant Step, launching a lifelong relationship with the stage. Across the late 50s and 60s, Gossett became a powerhouse in New York theater, appearing in landmark works including A Raisin in the Sun and The Blacks. He also sang and recorded later, co-writing the anti-war song Handsome Johnny with Richie Havens, proof that his creativity wasn't confined to scripts. TV widened his reach in the 1970s, and Good Times fans saw him twice, first as Donald Knight in Season 1, then as Florida's younger brother, Uncle Wilbert, in Season 3. Even with limited screen time, he brought quiet authority and emotional weight that made those episodes linger. National stardom arrived with Roots 1977, where his searing portrayal earned him an Emmy. Then came his defining film triumph, Gunnery Sergeant Emile Foley, in An Officer and a Gentleman, 1982. The role was fierce, disciplined, and unexpectedly tender, and it won him the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, the first time a black man took that prize. He rode that momentum into the Iron Eagle movies, acclaimed TV films, and later appearances that kept him visible to new generations well into his 80s. His private road wasn't smooth. Gossett married 3 times, raised 2 sons, and later spoke candidly about cocaine and alcohol addiction during the 1980s, crediting recovery programs and faith for pulling him back. Health challenges followed 2 toxic mold exposure in his Malibu home contributed to severe illness in the early 2000s. He was diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2010 and recovered. And he survived a serious bout of COVID-19 in 2020. Still, he kept working, refusing to let sickness rewrite his identity. Gossett died on March 29, 2024 in Santa Monica at 87. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, was the primary cause, with heart failure and atrial fibrillation contributing. In 2025, his legacy stands as both art and evidence, a ceiling breaker who never stopped showing what dignity, range, and hard-earned hope look like on screen. Moses Gunn. Moses Gunn never chased celebrity the way Hollywood likes to package it. He chased craft. Born October 2, 1929 in St. Louis, Missouri, he didn't step into acting until his early 30s, an unusually late start that hints at how deliberate his path was. Before cameras ever found him, Gunn was forged in the heat of theater-disciplined rehearsal rooms, long tours, and audiences who don't clap unless you earn it. That stage-first upbringing gave him a deep, ringing authority, an actor who could hold silence as powerfully as dialogue. His breakthrough came in 1962 with the off-Broadway production of Jean Genet's The Blacks, where he stood alongside the emerging wave of serious black theater artists. Gunn later became a founding force within the Negro Ensemble Company, a landmark institution created to expand space for black playwrights and performers when mainstream doors remained half-closed. On stage, he was widely admired for classical roles, including playing Othello on Broadway in 1970, a feat that demanded both vocal muscle and emotional precision. His performance in The Poison Tree earned a Tony Award nomination in 1976, and he also collected Obie Awards for his work in New York theater, proof that within the world that mattered most to him, he was already royalty. When you first saw him on screen, did you feel that theater weight in the way he carried a scene? Television audiences met him in many forms, but Good Times used him in a particularly meaningful way. After John Amos left, Gunn joined season 4 as Carl Dixon, a thoughtful atheist shop owner who challenges Michael's beliefs, then gradually becomes Florida Evans's love interest. He appears in 6 episodes, and his storyline refuses easy comedy. Carl is intelligent, calm, and tender, yet life deals him lung cancer. Their relationship introduces grief, faith, doubt, and adult companionship into a series that had recently lost its father figure. Gunn's Carl didn't replace James Evans. He offered Florida a different kind of partner, one built on conversation and mutual respect rather than household authority. Outside Cabrini Green, Gunn's screen roles were often sharper than the industry deserved to give him. He played Bumpy Jonas in Shaft 1971 and returned in Shaft's Big Score 1972, delivering menace with elegance. He also appeared in films like Rollerball 1975, Ragtime 1981, and Heartbreak Ridge 1986, while TV viewers remember him as Joe Kagan on Little House on the Prairie 1977 to 1981. Still, many critics argue that Hollywood rarely offered him parts equal to his stage brilliance. Gunn was married to Gwendolyn Mama Landes from 1966 until his death, and they had 2 children. He lived with severe asthma for most of his life, and on December 16, 1993 in Guilford, Connecticut, he died at 64 from complications related to that condition. In 2025, his body of work stands as a reminder that some artists aren't built for flash, they're built for truth, and truth lasts longer than fame. Helen Martin. Helen Martin's journey to recognition was anything but quick, and that's exactly why it resonates so deeply decades later. She was born on July 23, 1909 in St. Louis, Missouri, at a time when opportunities for black women in the performing arts were scarce and often humiliating. Yet she stepped onto stages anyway. By the 1930s, she was already working in theater, traveling, rehearsing, and enduring an industry that tried to keep black talent off the marquee. Instead of surrendering, she built a career brick by brick, quietly, stubbornly, and with a professionalism that never asked permission. Her early years were rooted in serious dramatic work. Martin performed in important productions, such as Orson Welles' Native Son, and later appeared in plays including Raisin Pearly Victorious and The Amen Corner. These weren't light jobs. They demanded depth, stamina, and control. She didn't become a star overnight because the era wasn't built to elevate women who looked like her. She became a star because she refused to leave the craft behind. For more than 6 decades, she kept showing up to the work while the world changed around her. Television audiences finally discovered her later in life. When Good Times premiered in 1974, Martin was already 65. She appeared as Wanda, better known as Weeping Wanda, a recurring figure whose constant tears became a running gag, yet Martin played her with subtle humanity, never letting the character drift into cruelty. Even a short scene with her could land like a small truth about loneliness in the middle of laughter. That mix of humor and ache became her signature as she moved through sitcoms in the years that followed. Her visibility grew in the 1980s and 1990s, especially through her beloved role as Pearl Shea on NBC's 2 and 27. There, Martin became the wise, sharp, church-going matriarch many viewers instantly recognized from their own neighborhoods. She also showed up in films like Hollywood Shuffle 1987, House Party 2 1991, and Don't Be a Menace to South Central While Drinking Your Juice in the Hood. 6. Often cast as the older woman who sees through everyone's nonsense. What made those parts memorable wasn't just the lines, it was Martin's rhythm, her facial control, and the way she could deliver a joke that felt like life advice. Off-screen, her story carried a quiet solitude. She never married and had no children, and in interviews, she spoke with surprising frankness about the paths she didn't take. One of her most famous comments was that if she hadn't been an actress, she might have become an exotic dancer, an unexpectedly playful confession from someone audiences associated with elder wisdom. It revealed an important truth. Even in old age, she still had curiosity, humor, and a sense of self beyond what roles allowed. Helen Martin died on March 25, 2000 in Monterey, California from a heart attack at 90 years old. In 2025, her legacy feels bigger than any single show. She represents the artists who carry culture on their backs for decades before the spotlight finally turns their way, then makes it worth the wait. Richard Ward. Richard Ward is one of those names that longtime Good Times viewers recognize instantly, even if he only appeared a handful of times. Born on March 15, 1915 in Glenside, Pennsylvania, Ward didn't follow a straight line into show business. He lived a full working man life, first serving in the U.S. Army during World War II in the South Pacific, then spending about 10 years as a New York City police detective before turning seriously to acting. That unusual road mattered. It gave him a lived-in gravitas that couldn't be faked, the kind you only get from real streets, real uniforms, and real responsibility. When Ward finally committed to performance in midlife, he brought that authority with him. He became an Actors Studio alumnus and built a respected stage resume long before television called him a familiar face. One of his proudest achievements came in 1972 when he played Willie Loman in Baltimore Center Stage's historic all-black production of Death of a Salesman. The role is a mountain for any actor, and Ward climbed it with such depth that many theater critics still cite it as a landmark moment in African-American drama. He also cherished productions like Ceremonies in Dark Old Men, where his voice and posture could fill a theater without him ever raising his volume. On-screen, Ward often landed in projects that needed weight more than flash. By the 1970s, his gravel-rich delivery turned him into a reliable guest star across major series, from socially sharp sitcoms to police procedurals. He appeared on shows such as All in the Family, The Jeffersons, Sanford and Son, Starsky and Hutch, including the pilot film, and Mary Hartman. Mary Hartman adding instant credibility wherever he walked on. Then came Good Times. Ward played Henry Evans, James Evans' estranged father, in 3 episodes between seasons 3 and 5. Henry wasn't designed to be lovable. At first, he is a man who abandoned his family decades earlier, yet Ward refused to play him as a simple villain. In The Family Tree, Henry's return forces James to confront old wounds on his birthday, and Ward makes the character painfully human, ashamed, defensive, and quietly hoping for mercy. Later appearances after James's death carry even more sorrow, and Ward's calm restraint gives those scenes their emotional punch. So let me ask you, did Henry's return make you more angry or more forgiving? Richard Ward's life ended suddenly on July 1, 1979 in Coxsackie, New York, when he suffered a heart attack at 64, only weeks after Good Times wrapped its final season. He didn't live to see the show become a 5-decade legend, but his episodes remain some of its most adult and haunting. In 2025, Ward stands as proof that a few scenes done honestly can echo as loudly as a whole career. Thalmus Rasulala. Thalmus Rasulala carried the aura of a leading man even when the camera placed him at the edge of the frame. Born November 15, 1939 in Miami, Florida, he grew up during a period when black performers had to be twice as skilled for half the chances. He honed his craft on stage, first developing a deep, resonant speaking voice and a physical stillness that made directors pay attention. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Rasulala was moving steadily through film and television, becoming a familiar presence in the era of hard-edged urban dramas and socially conscious storytelling. Many viewers first truly noticed him in the wave of 1970s black cinema. He appeared in films such as Cool Breeze, 1972, Willie Dynamite, 1974, and Blackula, 1972, where he brought a controlled intensity that suggested inner conflict rather than simple toughness. His finest mainstream breakthrough arrived with Roots 1977, in which he played Omoro Kinte Kunta Kinte's father. Even in limited scenes, Rasulala gave Omoro dignity, pride, and sorrow qualities that helped make Roots feel like lived history instead of television spectacle. On Good Times, Rasulala appeared as Ernie Harris, a dependable adult figure whose visits added balance to the Evans family's chaos. The role was not large, but his presence mattered. He played Ernie with calm authority, the kind of man who listens before he speaks and understands the weight of being a black father or mentor in a world that offers no softness. That subtle grounding helped Good Times hold on to its dramatic spine during seasons that often leaned toward bigger laughs. Behind the steady screen persona, Rasulala's real life was marked by turbulence. He married twice and both marriages ended. He fathered 7 children split across families, and the demands of acting, constant travel, long shoots, and unpredictable income kept him away from home more than he wanted. Friends described him as hard-working and loyal, but also as someone who carried stress quietly, rarely unloading his burdens in public. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, he worked at a relentless clip, appearing in projects like New Jack City 1991 and Mom and Dad Save the World 1992, as if determined to outpace time itself. That pace ended abruptly. Rasulala died on October 9, 1991 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, at just 51 years old, from a sudden heart attack only days after finishing what would be his final role. In 2025, his legacy still feels bittersweet. A gifted actor whose career kept rising, yet whose life closed too soon, leaving behind performances that are quiet, strong, and unforgettable in their restraint. Matthew Stymie Beard. Matthew Stymie Beard Jr. lived one of the most dramatic arcs in classic American entertainment: bright childhood fame, a long wilderness, and a hard-won return. He entered the world on January 1, 1925, in Los Angeles, California, the son of Matthew Beard Sr., a minister, and Johnny May Beard. As a little boy, he was signed by Hal Roach Studios, and between 1930 and 1935, became a household name as Stymie in the Our Gang short films. The oversized derby hat, perched on his bald head, given to him by comedian Stan Laurel, turned into an image millions recognized instantly. He wasn't just a cute kid in the background. He was a sly, quick-thinking center of the gang, often steering the story with a raised eyebrow and a streetwise line. When Our Gang ended for him at age 10, the industry moved on faster than childhood could keep up. He drifted into small parts and features, but steady work dried up as he grew older. By his late teens, Beard had left acting and slipped into the kind of trouble that swallowed many former child stars of that era. Arrests for theft led to deeper instability, and he became addicted to heroin, spending years in and out of jail. It was a brutal detour from that early spotlight, and it lasted far longer than most fans ever knew. Have you ever seen a former child star fight their way back like this? In the 1960s, Beard checked into Synanon, a drug rehab community in Los Angeles. Synanon later became infamous for darker reasons, but for Beard it was a turning point. He got clean, rebuilt his daily life, and began speaking publicly about addiction to warn others away from it. That recovery opened a narrow door back into show business. During the 1970s, he picked up guest roles on series such as Sanford and Son, The Jeffersons, and Emergency Then Good Times brought him in as Monty, a neighborhood character who appeared in recurring episodes from 1974 to 1977. Older viewers often felt a jolt of recognition. There was Stymie grown up still wearing the derby hat, sometimes still carrying that unmistakable timing. His comeback, however, was cut short. On January 3, 1981, 2 days after his 56th birthday, Beard suffered a stroke. The stroke caused him to fall downstairs and sustain serious head injuries. Pneumonia followed, and he died on January 8, 1981 in Los Angeles. He was buried at Evergreen Cemetery, laid to rest with the derby hat that had symbolized both his miracle start and his complicated middle. By 2025, his story stands as a reminder that fame can vanish overnight, but recovery, dignity, and a second act are still possible even after the darkest years. Teddy Wilson. Theodore Teddy Wilson was the kind of actor who didn't need the spotlight to prove his value. He simply walked into a scene and made it work. He was born December 10, 1943 in New York City, and grew up during a time when black performers had to carve their own lanes with talent and nerve. His first artistic love was music. He attended Florida A&M University, originally focusing on musical studies before shifting toward drama, a change that fit his natural sense of timing and his gift for character work. That training led him into the Negro Ensemble Company in New York, where many of the strongest black stage actors of the era sharpened their skills. By the early 1970s, Wilson had developed into a polished performer who could move between comedy and seriousness without losing credibility. Television audiences came to know him through recurring roles that felt instantly familiar. On ABC's That's My Mama, he played Earl the Postman, a steady presence whose humor came from everyday truth rather than cheap laughs. Then Good Times brought him in as Marion Sweet Daddy Williams, the smooth-talking hustler with sharp suits, street charm, and a sneaky conscience. Sweet Daddy could be hilarious one moment and quietly vulnerable the next, and Wilson rode that contrast beautifully. He also appeared on the show as a second character club owner, Stanley Bird, a rare double cast that showed just how much the producers trusted his range. After Good Times, Wilson kept pushing forward. In 1977, he landed a major opportunity as Phil Wheeler on NBC's Sanford Arms, a short-lived spin-off of Sanford and Son. The show only lasted 4 episodes, but Wilson's performance was widely seen as one of its bright spots. He continued guest starring across popular series through the 1980s, often playing working men authority figures or fast-talking neighborhood types roles he filled with depth that went beyond the script. His private world carried responsibilities that didn't show up on screen. Wilson had 3 children, Theodore Jr., Robert, and Nicole. 2 of them were with actress Joan Pringle, his co-star from That's My Mama, whom he married in 1980. Friends described him as devoted but stretched thin by the unpredictable rhythms of acting life. In the final years of his career, his health began to fail. He underwent open-heart surgery several years before his death, then suffered a series of worsening complications. On July 21, 1991, Teddy Wilson died at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles from stroke complications, only 47 years old. His career ended far too early, but his work still feels alive. A performer who could sell a joke, hold a dramatic beat, and leave you believing you'd met a real human being, not just a sitcom character. Jimmie Walker. Jimmie Walker didn't just play a character on Good Times, he became a cultural spark that helped define the sound and swagger of 1970s comedy. Born June 25, 1947 in the Bronx, New York, Walker grew up fast, funny, and hungry. Before television fame, he was already grinding as a young comic, writing jokes and doing stand-up in New York clubs while working whatever jobs kept the lights on. That early club circuit sharpened his style loose, physical, unpredictable, and fearless about turning pain into laughter. When Good Times premiered in 1974, Walker was 26 and cast as James J.J. Evans Jr. The role exploded. JJ's lanky energy, wide-eyed optimism, and loud catchphrase "Dynamite" turned Walker into one of the first black sitcom stars to cross fully into mainstream pop culture. The show ran 6 seasons and 133 episodes, and Walker earned Golden Globe nominations in 1975 and 1976 for supporting actor in a comedy series. But success came with tension. As JJ, his popularity spiked, scripts leaned harder into big comedy, and that shift fueled conflict behind the scenes, especially with co-stars who worried the show's message was being bent toward stereotype. Walker later admitted the backlash weighed on him for years, even while he understood JJ had opened doors for black comics nationwide. Did Dynamite feel like pure joy, or did you ever sense the sadness behind it? After the series ended in 1979, Walker refused to be boxed in. He returned to stand-up full-time, touring constantly through casinos, theaters, and comedy halls. On screen, he popped up across decades: Airplane 1980, Home Alone 2 1992. Everybody Hates Chris scrubs and guest spots ranging from game shows to sitcom cameos. He also used the JJ persona for commercial work, proof that even when Hollywood cooled, audiences never forgot the voice that made them laugh. Unlike many stars of his era, Walker stayed working, not chasing reinvention, but doubling down on what he loved most: live comedy in front of real people. In 2025, Walker is 78 and still performing stand-up regularly. He has never had children, and his personal life has remained mostly private compared to the noise surrounding his fame. Online estimates of his finances vary wildly and aren't reliably verifiable, so the clean truth is this: his lasting wealth is cultural. Half a century later, J.J. Evans remains one of TV's most famous sons, and Jimmy Walker remains the comedian who made a nation laugh loud enough to remember. 50 years after Good Times, the cast's real lives feel like a second series packed with pride, conflict, loss, and survival. Johnette DuBois and Esther Rolle battled to keep black family dignity intact on screen. John Amos paid a career price for that same fight. Others, Johnny Brown, Ben Powers, Moses Gunn, Thalmus, Rasulala Matthew Stymie, Beard, Teddy Wilson, left us far too early, while Jimmy Walker still tours, carrying both the glow and the burden of JJ. For legends of black excellence, one debate lingers: did the show's laughter liberate a generation, or did TV quietly trade respect for ratings?